I work as a security guard at a large manufacturing plant that operates around the clock. My shifts are usually uneventful, consisting of routine patrols and monitoring surveillance cameras. A few weeks ago, I was assigned to the graveyard shift covering for a colleague who... The plant is massive, with sprawling hallways and countless rooms filled with machinery. At night, the place takes on an entirely different atmosphere. The hum of the machines is softer, and the lights are dimmed to conserve energy. On my first night of the shift, I settled into the control room, keeping an eye on the monitors. Around 2 a.m., I began my scheduled patrol. Walking through the corridors, I felt a slight chill, which I attributed to the air conditioning. As I passed by the assembly line area, I heard a faint sound like distant footsteps. I called out, thinking it might be one of the night workers, but there was no response. Continuing my patrol, I entered the storage area where spare parts and equipment are kept. The lights flickered slightly as I walked in. I noticed that one of the storage racks was out of place, shifted several feet from where it should be. It struck me as odd since these racks are heavy and require machinery to move. I radioed the control room to check if anyone had been working in the storage area, but the operator confirmed that no one was scheduled to be there. Shrugging it off as a possible oversight, I moved the rack back into position and continued my rounds. As I made my way back to the control room, I glanced at one of the monitors displaying a view of the storage area. To my surprise, the rack was shifted again, back to the odd position. I thought perhaps I was mistaken earlier, so I decided to return and double-check. Entering the storage area once more, I found the rack exactly where I had left it after moving it. Feeling a bit unsettled, I returned to the control room and rewound the surveillance footage. The video showed the rack slowly sliding across the floor on its own, with no one in sight. There was no logical explanation for how that could happen. I decided to save the footage and report the incident to my supervisor in the morning. For the rest of the night, I kept a close eye on the monitors. Around 4 a.m., I noticed a shadow moving along one of the corridors on the camera feed. It was quick, darting from one side to the other. I switched to different camera angles but couldn't locate the source. Determined to find out what was going on, I ventured out to the corridor where I had seen the shadow. The area was quiet, with only the faint hum of machinery in the background. Suddenly I heard a whisper barely audible, seeming to come from just around the corner. I turned the corner quickly but found nothing. Feeling a bit unnerved, I decided to finish my shift in the control room. When the morning crew arrived, I reported the strange occurrences to my supervisor and showed him the footage of the moving rack. He watched it intently but seemed skeptical. He suggested that it might be a glitch in the camera or perhaps someone playing a prank. I knew what I had experienced was real, but without any concrete evidence, there wasn't much else I could do. Over the next few nights, similar incidents occurred. Objects would be out of place, unexplained sounds echoed through the halls, and shadows appeared on the monitors without any identifiable source. I began to doubt myself, wondering if the long hours were getting to me. I mentioned the incidents to a few coworkers, and one of them admitted that strange things often happened during the night shift. He said that years ago, there had been an accident in the plant, resulting in the death of a worker. Since then, many employees reported unexplained phenomena, especially at night. While I'm not one to believe in ghosts or the supernatural, I couldn't ignore what I had witnessed. I requested to return to my regular daytime shifts, and my supervisor agreed. Now, when I walk through the plant during the day, everything seems normal, but I can't shake the feeling that when the lights go down and the plant grows quiet, something else awakens. The night shift anomaly remains unexplained, a mystery that lingers in the shadows of the workplace. I work in the records department of a large hospital, managing patient files and administrative documents. The job is straightforward but requires attention to detail and strict organization. A few months ago, we began the process of digitizing all our paper records, which meant long hours scanning documents and ensuring everything was correctly archived. One evening, I decided to stay late to catch up on the backlog. Most of my colleagues had already left and the office was quiet. I settled into my cubicle, surrounded by stacks of files waiting to be scanned. As I worked through the pile, I noticed that some of the documents I'd just scanned were missing from the digital folder. At first, I thought I might have forgotten to save them, so I double-checked to ensure they were properly uploaded before moving on. About an hour later, I went back to review the scanned documents, and once again, several files were missing, including ones I was certain I'd saved. Feeling frustrated, I decided to take a short break. When I returned, I found a manila folder on my desk that I didn't recognize. It was old and worn, with no label. Curious, I opened it to find medical records dating back to the 1950s. The files contained patient information, doctor's notes, and treatment plans, all handwritten. I had never seen these documents before, and they weren't supposed to be in our department. I checked the system, but there was no digital record of these patients. Deciding it was best to set them aside for now, I placed the folder on a separate shelf and returned to my work. As the night wore on, I heard faint footsteps down the hall. Assuming it was the cleaning crew, I didn't pay much attention. However, the footsteps seemed to stop right outside my cubicle, and I felt as if someone was watching me. I peeked around the corner but saw no one. The hallway was empty, and the lights flickered slightly. Returning to my desk, I noticed that the old manila folder was open, and the documents were spread out as if someone had been reading them. Feeling uneasy, I gathered the papers and put them back into the folder. I decided to secure them in a locked cabinet until I could ask my supervisor about them in the morning. Just as I was about to leave, the computer screen flickered, and a document appeared on the screen. It was one of the old medical records from the folder, but now digitized and displayed prominently. I hadn't scanned these documents, so I couldn't understand how it appeared on my screen. The patient's name was Margaret Willis, admitted in 1953. The notes mentioned experimental treatments and unexplained phenomena occurring during her stay. As I read further, the text began to distort, and the screen flashed with static. Suddenly, the office lights dimmed, and the atmosphere grew colder. I heard a whisper, faint but clear. "Help me." Startled, I looked around but saw no one. I decided I had enough for one night. I grabbed my things and hurried out of the office. As I exited, I glanced back to see the silhouette of a woman standing near my desk. She was translucent, barely visible, and vanished as quickly as she appeared. The next day, I told my supervisor about the strange occurrences and showed him the manila folder. He was puzzled and said that those records shouldn't exist. The hospital had undergone a fire in the 1960s that destroyed many old documents. We checked the locked cabinet, but the folder was gone. The digital file that had appeared on my screen was nowhere to be found in the system. My supervisor suggested that I might have been overworked and recommended taking a few days off. I took his advice but couldn't shake the feeling that someone was trying to communicate through those lost documents. Upon returning to work, I did some research on Margaret Willis. There were no official records of her ever being a patient at the hospital. To this day, documents occasionally disappear from our system without explanation. Some colleagues have reported similar experiences, but most dismiss it as glitches or human error. I remain convinced that the hospital's past is reaching out, the echoes of forgotten patients trying to tell their stories. The disappearing documents serve as a reminder that some histories refuse to be erased, lingering in the shadows of our modern workplace. I recently started working at a prestigious law firm located in a high-rise building downtown. The office occupies the 14th through 16th floors, and the environment is fast-paced and demanding. One evening I was working late to prepare for an important case. Most of the staff had already left, and the building was quiet. Around 11 p.m., I decided to call it a night. I gathered my things and headed to the elevators. As I waited, I noticed that the elevator on the far right, which I hadn't seen used before, arrived with its doors opening smoothly. The interior was slightly different, with older fixtures and a dimmer light. I stepped in and pressed the button for the lobby. The elevator began its descent, but instead of stopping at the ground floor, it continued moving down. The floor indicator displayed negative numbers, which didn't make sense since the building had only 3 basement levels. I started to feel uneasy as the elevator descended to B5, B6, and kept going. I pressed the emergency stop button, but nothing happened. The elevator finally halted at B13, and the doors opened to a dark corridor. Hesitant, I peered out but stayed inside the elevator. The hallway was dimly lit by flickering lights, and I could hear distant echoes like whispers or muffled conversations. An unsettling feeling washed over me. I repeatedly pressed the button for the lobby, hoping the elevator would ascend. The doors began to close slowly, but just before they shut completely, a figure appeared at the end of the corridor, a tall, shadowy silhouette moving toward the elevator. Panicking, I pressed the door close button frantically. The doors finally sealed, and the elevator jolted before starting its ascent. The floor indicator flickered erratically before displaying the lobby level. When the doors opened, I rushed out and glanced back to see the elevator doors closing behind me. I approached the security desk to report the malfunctioning elevator. The guard looked at me puzzled and said there were only 4 elevators in the building, not 5. I insisted that I had taken the 5th elevator, the one on the far right. He accompanied me back to the elevator bank, but the elevator I had used was no longer there. The wall was seamless, with no indication that an elevator had ever existed in that spot. Feeling bewildered, I apologized and left the building. The next day, I shared the experience with a coworker. She looked at me strangely and mentioned a rumor about a hidden elevator that sometimes appeared late at night. According to the tale, the elevator led to the old foundations of a building that had stood on the site before the current one was constructed, a building that had been demolished after a tragic accident. I wasn't sure what to believe, but I couldn't deny what I had experienced. Since that night, I make sure to leave work before it gets too late. Occasionally, I catch myself glancing toward the spot where the elevator to nowhere had appeared, wondering if it might return. The incident remains a mystery, an unexplained phenomenon that haunts the quiet hours of the workplace. It serves as a reminder that some places hold secrets buried beneath their modern facades, waiting for unsuspecting individuals to stumble upon them. I work at a small call center that handles customer service for various companies. It's a modest operation, with about 20 of us sharing shifts to cover the phones around the clock. One night I was assigned to the overnight shift covering for a coworker who had called in sick. The office is a different place at night, quiet and dimly lit, with only the hum of computers and the occasional ring of a phone breaking the silence. Around 2 a.m. the calls usually slow down, giving me time to catch up on paperwork. That night, just as I was about to take a short break, the phone rang. I picked it up and went through the standard greeting. The voice on the other end was faint and distorted, as if there was heavy static on the line. The caller whispered, asking if I could help them. I asked for the caller's name and account information, but there was no response, just the faint sound of breathing. I repeated my request, thinking perhaps the line was bad. The caller then said that someone was watching them. A chill ran down my spine. I asked who was watching and if they needed emergency assistance. The line went dead. Feeling uneasy, I noted the time and the caller ID, which simply read unknown number. I reported the strange call to my supervisor via email, as there was no one else in the office. I tried to put it out of my mind, attributing it to a prank or someone needing help but too afraid to ask. About half an hour later, the phone rang again. I hesitated before answering. This time, the same distorted voice whispered that someone was coming for me. My heart pounded. I asked who was speaking and what they wanted. The caller repeated the warning and then hung up. I checked the caller ID again. Unknown number. Feeling genuinely frightened, I decided to call building security. The guard on duty assured me that all entrances were secure and that he hadn't seen anyone unusual. He offered to come up and keep me company, but I declined, not wanting to overreact. Minutes later, the phone rang a third time. My hand shook as I picked up the receiver. Before I could speak, the caller whispered that they were here. At that moment, the lights in the office flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. The only illumination came from the computer monitors, casting an eerie glow. I heard a faint creaking sound like a door opening slowly. I grabbed my cell phone and turned on the flashlight. Calling out, I asked if anyone was there. There was no response, just the oppressive silence of the empty office. I decided to gather my things and leave immediately. As I headed toward the exit, the phones on all the desks started ringing simultaneously. The sound was deafening in the dark, empty space. I covered my ears and ran to the stairwell, not waiting for the elevator. Descending the stairs, I felt a cold draft unusual for a building where the windows don't open. I reached the lobby and saw the security guard at his desk. He looked up, surprised to see me in such a state. I told him what had happened. He checked the security monitors but saw nothing out of the ordinary. He suggested reviewing the footage, so we replayed the recordings of the office floor. To my astonishment, the camera showed me sitting at my desk, but during the times I received the calls, I appeared to be talking to no one. There was no record of the phones ringing. Even more unsettling, when the lights went out, the camera showed them functioning normally. The guard looked at me with concern, suggesting that I might be overtired. I knew what I had experienced was real. I decided to go home and took the next day off to collect myself. When I returned to work, I asked around discreetly if anyone had ever experienced anything strange during the night shift. One of my coworkers hesitated before admitting that she had received odd calls as well, whispers, static, unsettling messages. She said she didn't report them because she thought it was just her imagination. Digging deeper, I discovered that years ago, before our company occupied the space, the building had been a psychiatric facility. Rumor had it that a patient had escaped confinement and caused a tragedy on one of the upper floors. Whether the stories were true or not, I couldn't say, but I requested to be moved to the day shift and avoided working nights from then on. The phantom caller hasn't bothered me since, but sometimes when I'm alone in a quiet room, I think about those whispers and wonder who or what was trying to reach out. Perhaps some echoes from the past linger on, making their presence known in the only way they can. As a research assistant at a biotechnology firm, I spend long hours in the laboratory conducting experiments and analyzing data. Our lab is equipped with state-of-the-art technology, and the environment is strictly controlled. A few weeks ago, I was assigned to a new project that required working after hours when the lab was less crowded. One night, around midnight, I was alone in the lab monitoring a critical experiment. The only sounds were the soft hum of the equipment and the occasional beep from the monitors. While reviewing data on the computer, I noticed a reflection on the screen, someone standing behind me. Startled, I turned around quickly, but no one was there. I brushed it off as a trick of the light and returned to my work. A few minutes later, I felt a cold breeze pass by, unusual since the lab's temperature is carefully regulated. I decided to take a short break and stepped out into the hallway. As I walked, the lights flickered slightly. I heard faint footsteps echoing behind me, even though I was certain I was alone on the floor. I called out to see if anyone was there, but received no response. Returning to the lab, I found one of the microscopes was turned on, its light illuminating an empty slide. This was odd because I hadn't been using that equipment. I checked the logs, but no one else had accessed the lab that night. Feeling uneasy, I continued with my experiment. While analyzing samples, I heard a whisper, barely audible, saying my name. I looked around but saw no one. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. Determined to finish my work, I tried to ignore the sensations. Suddenly, one of the machines began to malfunction, emitting error messages and beeping loudly. I rushed over to troubleshoot but couldn't find any technical issues. As I stood there, the computer screen flashed and a message appeared, "Leave now." My heart raced. I tried to take a screenshot, but the message disappeared as quickly as it had come. I decided it was time to leave. I secured the lab and headed toward the elevator. As I waited, the lights in the corridor began to flicker more intensely. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside, pressing the button for the lobby. The elevator descended smoothly until it jerked to a stop between floors. The lights inside dimmed, and I was plunged into semi-darkness. I pressed the emergency call button, but there was no response. In the dim light, I saw a faint figure reflected in the metallic surface of the elevator doors, a woman wearing a lab coat, her face obscured. She seemed to be standing right behind me. I turned around, but the elevator was empty. A soft voice whispered, "They shouldn't have done it." I felt a chill run down my spine. The elevator suddenly resumed its descent and reached the lobby. I exited quickly, eager to get out of the building. The next day, I shared the experience with a senior colleague. He listened carefully and then revealed that years ago, a researcher had died in a lab accident under mysterious circumstances. Some say her spirit still lingers, especially during late hours. He advised me to avoid working alone at night. I heeded his warning and adjusted my schedule accordingly. While I can't explain what happened that night, I believe I encountered something beyond the realm of normal experience. The ghost in the lab remains a silent presence, a reminder of past tragedies that continue to echo in the workplace. I work as a delivery driver for a logistics company that operates in a large industrial area on the outskirts of the city. My job involves picking up packages from various warehouses and delivering them to clients across town. One evening, I was assigned a last-minute pickup from a warehouse I'd never been to before, Warehouse 12 Billion. The sun was setting as I drove through the maze of identical buildings, each marked with faded numbers. After some searching, I found Warehouse 12 Billion tucked away at the end of a secluded lane. The building looked older than the others, with rusted metal siding and overgrown weeds along the perimeter. I parked my truck and approached the entrance. The door was slightly ajar, creaking as I pushed it open. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit, with only a few flickering overhead lights casting long shadows across the floor. Rows of dusty shelves stretched into the darkness, filled with unmarked boxes. I called out to see if anyone was there, but my voice echoed unanswered. Checking my paperwork, I confirmed that I was at the correct location and that the pickup was scheduled for this time. I decided to find the shipment myself, hoping to finish quickly and head home. As I walked down the aisles, I noticed that some of the boxes looked decades old, covered in dust and cobwebs. A sense of unease settled over me. I finally spotted a pallet wrapped in plastic with a label matching the pickup order. Relieved, I began to maneuver it toward the loading dock. Suddenly, I heard a distant sound of faint melody, like an old music box playing somewhere in the warehouse. It was eerie, yet oddly compelling. I tried to ignore it, focusing on moving the heavy pallet. The music grew louder, and I couldn't help but feel drawn toward it. Leaving the pallet, I followed the sound deeper into the warehouse. The air grew colder, and the lighting became sparse. I turned a corner and found an old wooden crate with a small music box sitting on top, playing its haunting tune. As I approached, the music stopped abruptly. I picked up the music box, examining its intricate design. Just then, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, expecting to see a warehouse worker, but there was no one there. The shadows seemed to shift, and I felt as though I was being watched. Unnerved, I decided to leave immediately. I returned to where I had left the pallet, but it was gone. Confused, I retraced my steps, thinking I had taken a wrong turn. The layout of the warehouse now seemed different, with aisles leading to unfamiliar areas. Panic set in as I realized I was lost. I tried to use my phone's GPS, but there was no signal. The warehouse seemed to absorb all sound, even my footsteps were muffled. I shouted for help, but my voice felt swallowed by the oppressive silence. Desperate to find an exit, I moved quickly through the labyrinth of shelves. I spotted a faint light ahead and hurried toward it, hoping it was the way out. Instead, I found myself back at the area with the music box, which had resumed playing on its own. A chill ran down my spine. I grabbed the music box, intending to take it with me, thinking it might be some kind of key. As I held it, a whisper echoed around me, a voice saying that I should leave it behind. Terrified, I set the music box down and backed away. The shadows around me seemed to coalesce into human-like forms, watching silently. Gathering my courage, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. When I opened them, the warehouse was brightly lit, and the pallet was right in front of me. I wasted no time loading it onto my truck. As I secured the doors, I glanced back at the warehouse entrance. The building now appeared brand new, with fresh paint and a modern logo. Confused but unwilling to linger, I got into my truck and drove away. The next day, I reported the strange experience to my supervisor. He looked puzzled and informed me that Warehouse 12 Billion had been demolished years ago after a fire. There was no record of any pickup schedule from that location. I checked my delivery logs, and the entry for Warehouse 12 Billion was gone. The packages I had picked up were nowhere to be found. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night. I avoid that part of the industrial area, and whenever I hear a distant melody, it brings back unsettling memories. Some places hold on to their past, refusing to let go. Perhaps I stumbled into a moment trapped in time, a residual echo of what once was. All I know is that I won't be returning to Warehouse 12 Billion, wherever or whenever it may be.